Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge.
Hi! This episode is about innovation at work, getting creative about costs and connections, benefiting your bottom line and your front line. Listening to customers' issues when so much is in flux. What more can you do to innovate? What new offerings can you create? Thinking differently about the services that people need and the dynamics of how those might be delivered. I'm delighted to be discussing these creative and innovative opportunities with Stephen Dooley, founder of Roamr. Roamr is a corporate travel accommodation platform built for distributed teams. Thinking differently, they are on a mission to remove the cost of accommodation from business and leisure travel. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
I'm very well, Sophie. Thank you very much for having me on. Excited to chat today.
I am indeed, and want to get started right away. Starting at the beginning, you studied commerce and business.
Yeah. So I did that in UCC in Cork. Where I'm actually living down in the west of Cork now, so a little outside the city, but started doing commerce. Kind of was fairly obvious in school that was the path I'd go down. It was either that or kind of a business and law blend. So definitely had the sort of the business, even in the subjects in school that we did in the Leaving Cert. That was probably where I always leaned. So did that and stayed going. I spent a year in America as part of that, which was one of the best experiences I could have ever asked for. But came back thinking I'd be on the next plane out there and relocating, but that became kind of master's and PhD and time went by.
You went to University of San Diego, I saw. Going from Cork to the west coast of the States, that must have been a huge change.
Yeah, but I was massively excited by it. The way that the schooling system worked here is you kind of have two choices in your third year of college. You can go out and do work placement, which is probably like a 6-month type of internship, or you can go and do your Erasmus. And that was exciting to me, the travel piece, getting out there and seeing a different part of the world. But I also was able to get some summer internships the year before and the year after. So I kind of felt like it would put me in a better position to get into the workforce, right? Having a little bit more life experience and a lens into a different part of the world and also closing the gap on not having other people have 6 months experience in an internship that I didn't have. So I felt like I found a way to do both. But my God, what an amazing time. And
what were particular learnings that you brought back from there?
God, yeah. Well, there's a sort of academic lane and then there's the life lane, and I actually probably think the life lane was a better part of it. But what it allowed me to do for my own degree was change what my minors would have been, because I ultimately actually had another 6 months of schooling that other people didn't. So I was able to do the exact same coursework that they did, plus 6 months of difference. So I got a lot of choice. So I ended up actually getting a minor in finance as well as the typical that you'd have one major, one minor here. So I took a lot of advanced financial management courses, and that probably set up my thinking on where I ended up doing master stuff thereafter. So there was a lot in that regard. But I think the majority of what I came back with was probably just a little bit more of an ambition. There's a certain, the folks around me out in the States, when you say you have a big idea or desire and an ambition on whatever that thing was, and it's changed over time, but there's this sort of, I believe you, go get it, man, and how can I help you attitude. And I kind of took that back as I think it probably sharpened my people skills as well a little bit too, getting out there, meeting loads of people. You're thrown in the deep end with no friends,
So you go from let's go do it, the whole American entrepreneurial spirit, and then you go into academia and you do a master's and you do a doctorate in financial technology. There was a bunch of different things that were very interesting within that doctorate, which is to do with robo-advisors. There are other elements, digital transformation, disintermediation, and blockchain, as well as trust. So I'd like to hear a bit more about different elements of those and how trust fits in with all of those that you were looking into as you studied financial technology.
Yeah, so I suppose it kind of meandered, right? So the opportunity was put in front of me to do a kind of funded master's. My goal, as I said, was kind of actually, how do I get back out to the States and build a career out there? And I was kind of, my mindset at that point was probably more around financial technology, wealth management, maybe go try and prove myself on Wall Street. And if I can do that, everybody will think I'm smart and intelligent. So there's probably an inferior complexity or something going on there. But, ultimately, I kind of made the decision to say, this master's would give me a better opportunity to go and do that. I knew that, technology was underpinning a good chunk of how decisions are made. So that's why the robo-advisor was kind of where it started. And in that first year, there was a look at different technologies like robo-advisor, blockchain, and a few more. The blockchain one kind of went to the wayside. I was more interested in almost like the consumer psychology dynamics.
Okay.
The way that I could summarize what I looked at is like, if you imagine a Venn diagram, you've got technological features, you've got consumer psychology over here, and then you've got environmental factors. And I was trying to figure out why certain platforms get adopted at the rates that they do. So it kind of transitioned into sharing economy and looking at Ubers and Airbnbs, Revolut, which would be a neobank over this side of the world. Venmo maybe would be the American equivalent type of adoption. But yeah, it was trying to figure out what's changing in the consumer world that's letting these technologies be adopted so rapidly. Is it a technological feature, or is it actually like a psychological shift in society? So trust was a huge part of that thread between all of it.
In addition to trust, what else did you would find or believe that were some of the fundamentals or the key factors that helped something, one platform take off rather than another?
There was reasons in those three buckets for all of them, right? And it was kind of trying to find generalist statements that you could make about why technology was being adopted. But if I look at the Airbnb and the Uber side and the sharing economy, what really fascinated me there was, I've kind of summarized what I was looking at typically by saying that my parents gave me two lessons in life: don't get in the car with a stranger, and don't answer the door to a stranger. And Uber and Airbnb just completely changed their thinking, right?
Yes, that's fascinating.
It was like the highest no-no, right? It was the highest societal bar. It's ingrained in you from a young age. Do not do this. And somehow they managed to completely change our thinking.
Right.
So some of the same tactics existed in things like Revolut and robo-advisors. Like one real example that I think about there is, in Ireland, the majority of people who have a bank account who are over the age of 35 are either banking with Bank of Ireland or AIB. They're the two kind of traditional incumbent banks.
Okay.
But now Revolut is actually one, like Ireland is the highest adoption, I think, of Revolut globally. And there's a whole wave of change that happened. But when I ask people at some of the kind of talks or the lectures that I used to give is, show of hands, who has a bank account with Bank of Ireland and AIB? Pretty much everyone put their hand up, and I say, how many of you, keep your hand up if your parents had a bank account with that bank beforehand and that's why you had? And it's almost 100%, right? And then the other side is, how many of you use Revolut? Okay, well, keep a hand up if the reason you use Revolut is because your parents had a Revolut, and the whole hands kind of drop down. So why most people in their 50s open a Revolut is because they've got kids going to college who are trying to say, this is a great way for me to get money from mom and dad every week. So it flipped the referral. It used to be parent to child, and it became child to parent in a way. So that was a real consumer change, and that's how they leveraged that a little bit to get the adoption going. So there's a bunch more that you could dive into there.
Right. Okay. And so then the younger generation would be driving the adoption and using the different platforms with much more facility than others, than other generations. You then go from academia into entrepreneurship. It is obviously a very important factor that the pandemic happened. You're lecturing about finance and business, and then you go and choose to launch your own business. What was that journey?
Yeah, it was definitely, the catalyst was the pandemic for sure, and the whole changing ways of working. So I suppose where I was at the time was I started doing a couple of classes in Griffith College in kind of the computing school first. So probably joined there in that September before COVID. By January, I had taken a couple of more business classes, so I kind of had a foot in two departments there, and there was an opportunity that cropped up where I ended up actually getting the head of faculty role in Griffith College in the computing school.
Nice.
And that was 2 weeks. I took that role, and 2 weeks after that, COVID hit. So it was absolute carnage and chaos, crisis management. Everything was now going online into our laptops, trying to figure that out. How do we get teams working well here and high-performing teams? How do we hire the right people in this environment? So a whole bunch of learnings that wasn't really expected. But after about a year of that, or after a couple of semesters of it, we kind of had the system going, right? All the classes were online, the exams were being managed online. And that was the light bulb moment where I said, hey, finally, I don't have to do this sort of sacrificing of travel experience against career progression, right? That I had kind of just said, head down in my 20s, do PhD research, get going on the jobs ladder, and we can travel later in life.
Right.
But this kind of light bulb went off, being like, I had visions of myself and my girlfriend at the time. We were planning on going out to Marseille, doing my corrections in a coffee shop with a cappuccino. I had these grandiose visions.
Sounds good.
It sounded perfect, right? It was the answer to all the prayers. And I went and got it approved by my boss at the time. It was kind of, I think this is allowed, which meant that in my mind it was allowed. And ultimately, when push came to shove, we tried to book an Airbnb and it was €4,000 in January to go to Marseille, and it just instantly kind of popped the bubble.
Okay.
So that was probably that sort of,
and this
there has to be a better way.
2021 or beginning of 2022?
So this would have been the January after COVID started, which would have been probably 2021 when the idea started to fester a little. It was kind of personal pain point. And
You're right.
The research lens, obviously, in looking at the Airbnb shifts and how the world and the consumer world was changing, probably was the lens I was looking at the world through. So that was kind of how the first pain point happened. And I met Jason along the way too, and he completely related with the pain point. And even another version for him was, when we travel and, himself and his wife are able to do these kind of remote working trips and work from anywhere, the challenge was actually both of us are going to be in an apartment. Is the Wi-Fi solid? Can we both be on calls at the same time?
Yep.
Is there a sit-stand desk? Jason's a developer. He's a dual monitor and doesn't want to be anywhere without it. So the kind of work-related amenities.
Sure. And you need to have a door so that people can be closed off, and can somebody still access the kitchen if they need a cup of tea in the meantime or something? Yeah.
The undercurrent was pretty much that we felt that the world of work had changed, and there was an opportunity and an appetite within the employee base to be able to kind of do this two birds, one stone. Companies started responding to it by rolling out, like in technology, you see it now nearly everywhere, that there's a work from anywhere policy. You're allowed 4 weeks abroad or whatever it might be, but 97% of those technology firms have some location flexibility now at this stage. So it's kind of got to the point of being standard place, but we were kind of saying there's a lot to solve in that space to find a balance between the employer-employee needs.
The way that you've addressed, or the way that you've tried to flip how people are thinking about business travel specifically, and creating a different experience and a financial benefit to it, is really interesting to me, because you've just thought way outside the box. So I'd love you to explain the idea that needed to be worked out to make it fully viable, because as it's taken off, who are the people who are adopting it to begin with?
Yeah, so there's a lot of wrinkles to be ironed out from where it started, you're right. But I think why we chose to go after it was we felt that there was a couple of societal tailwinds that were kind of behind us, right? There was this whole changing in the way that we work from anywhere was becoming an opportunity. There was distributed teams. We saw, the employer of record space just absolutely exploding, right? Everybody could now, in theory, work from anywhere. But we felt the goal would be, well, what if we could make work from anywhere work from everywhere? And what's the bridge to that? It's not internet access and policies anymore. It's actually just cost. So initially, V1 was probably looking more through the employee lens. We were saying, right, many of them have this opportunity, but they can't realize it because it's really expensive to pay rent in Dublin and Lisbon at the same time if you want to go out there for a week.
Sure.
How do we find a way to solve that problem, mainly for the employee? And at the time as well, there was this great resignation. Companies were trying to retain talent by offering this flexibility. How do we make it better? So when we kind of shook hands on it, about 7 months after that, we had launched and kind of had the first product in the hands of early adopters and early paying customers, giving us little small amounts of money to validate the value propositions. But ultimately what that was is now we call that product Roamr for Workations. It's basically a home swap platform. Companies pay as a perk or benefit. All their employees come on platform and they can swap homes with one another completely for free. So you're making that opportunity accessible to the workforce, and kind of there's an alignment and retention benefit. But once we launched that, by just talking with customers, doing more and more customer discovery, having as many conversations with HR, people leaders, finance leaders, what we were kind of hearing back was, hey, this is great, but is there any way that we could apply this to our corporate spend, because we're spending a hell of a lot of money on that?
So that actually came from the businesses themselves. Interesting.
Yes. Yeah. So there was that, they say launch fast, launch early, listen to the users, figure out what the actual solution needs to look like and mold. So ultimately where we are now, or what Roamr is it's a platform that helps companies save 30% on their corporate travel accommodation. And we do that by paying employees instead of hotels. So if you're traveling for work, rather than staying in an expensive hotel, a little bit boring and kind of cookie cutter hotel, you could be hosted by a friend or a colleague living in that city, and we take the money that would have been spent on the hotel and we redistribute it. So the company saves 30% off the top. They're absolutely delighted. CFO is pushing it straight to the bottom line, but they actually get to deliver it in a way that's a financial uplift for their teams. So 2 of the employees could host one another, and that that then turbocharges the reason why they're spending money on the travel in the first place. Nowadays, the reason why people are spending money to travel is get people out in front of customers or build culture and collaboration. We've got this distributed team. How do we get them together? How do we make that time intentional? How do we foster relationships in a distributed world? So if folks are hosting one another, breaking bread, sharing stories informally in the evenings, we believe that that's a way better way to build culture rather than a kind of team building awkward session in the middle of the office and a little bit like overforced, you know?
Just to clarify, the amount that was spent on the hotel, there's a cut off that, and then one employee who is hosting, they get half the rest of the money, and the other person, the employee who is staying with them, gets the other piece. So there are two people benefiting there, and
the company too. So the way that we would think about it is, the company was putting this person on the road. So right now there's a sort of sunk cost or an alternative hotel spend that's been allocated. We consider that number to be 100%. That's what they would have paid if Roamr didn't exist.
Right.
The company saves 30% off the top for that number. Roamr takes their 10% transaction fee, and then we split the rest back to the two employees or the employee and their friend if they're staying in their personal network evenly. So 30% to the host, 30% to the guest, 30% to the company, and our transaction fee of 10%.
Have the companies tried to get more of a discount? And what levels in a particular organization are comfortable opening up their home to another employee?
It's very interesting that obviously there's folks on different ends of the spectrum with a different mindset of how do we maximize cost savings. Most of them feel that 20% is pretty compelling cost savings, right? If you look at companies like, let's say, for example, Shopify, right? Shopify are spending $33 million a year on travel. The majority now of the spend in any of those is on accommodation. So the percentage of that whole pie that used to be accommodation was about 34%. We're now seeing that become 36 to 40%. And it's just because hotels are growing maybe 10% year on year.
Got it.
So more and more money has been spent on the accommodation part. So even if you look at the Shopify example, about 660,000 is the growth in the pain point that they're seeing.
Yes.
So they're spending north of 12 million on this.
Right.
So any meaningful saving makes sense. But what's amazing is there's also a positive uplift from a culture and engagement, retention. So there's cost reduction and cost savings that happens there from not having the same turnover. So I've spoken to CFOs that have said, hey, we would like to see this number be higher to roll it out. But I had one really interesting conversation with an Irish CEO. They were trying to convert the top floor of their office space into apartments, right? Because the office space wasn't being used as much, but also they were spending millions on hotels in Dublin to bring the team members together to build culture.
Right.
So we said, if someone is willing to go through the planning authorities to try to solve this problem, it must be a huge now. You maybe having an experience of what the planning authorities are like in Ireland. That's painful. Right? Many people would opt for pulling teeth at a dentist.
Got it. Okay.
So if they're willing to go to that pain to solve the problem, let's try and have a chat with them and say, hey, here's an alternative solution.
Right.
So the conversation started entirely anchored in cost reduction.
Okay.
Right? We were trying to save money.
Yep.
By the end of that conversation, he said to me, could we squeeze down our savings to like maybe 15%, I would just love if our team were doing this from like a culture build perspective. Okay. So I was like, wow, given that we didn't start there, it'd be fine. But we started on the cost piece and we got to that point. It was very, very interesting.
What types of layers? Is it typically the sort of lower levels in an organization, or particular types of organization, like maybe Shopify, which is very distributed? Because you and I had a conversation which was very interesting to me about the fact that business travel had got to pre-pandemic levels and then some, but it wasn't typically people going to big conferences, things like that. It was much more people from the same company going and meeting and sort of getting together for those retreats, meeting each other in different offices. So the travel is up there, the opportunity is there for you. Who is actually taking advantage of this typically?
Yeah, and we haven't got Shopify on the platform, by all means, right? If anyone's listening that can help us out on that, shoot us on an intro. But it's the kind of the type of company that we've gone after, right? Okay. Technology companies, there's a few reasons for that. They typically are more open and embracing of kind of these types of ideas, but the majority of their workforce, right? We live in a post-Airbnb world. We live in a post-Uber world. Our job would have been a lot harder if we launched this in 2005 versus the consumer just knows what it's like to engage with the sharing economy. Yep. But the demographic is probably, for the time being, a little bit more on the younger side of the workforce. So sort of Gen Z to millennial, we're probably seeing maybe 31 to 33 is that sort of typical age range. But we've got folks who are on the higher end of that as well too, that have used the product multiple times. But I think the majority of the adoption will happen in that base, they understand it from a consumer lens. There's probably a desire within that group of the workforce to create connection at work. They maybe don't have the same networks, right? They're probably passing through companies a lot quicker. So there's a sort of sense of urgency on building their networks and connections at work as well.
Interesting point.
And there's also probably more of a cost impact as well. A lot of those folks are trying to get on the property ladder, save for a mortgage, so every €100 a night that they earn from Roamr actually is quite meaningful and impactful on that, beyond just the relationship build too. So that's kind of the space that we see ourselves playing in.
This is an interesting combination here. The way I see it, and looking ahead, it's, the HR, IT, and facilities management here is much more the chief financial officer really need to be coordinating, need to be sort of strategically aligned. And so this is what you're offering, is a concept that brings that together already. Who are you typically going after when you're looking at a company, knowing that it is both the financial benefit, but also very much on the people side of things? Where are you finding the most resonance now?
Yeah, it's an interesting, and it always reminds me of a conversation I had with one of our investors, Jeff Diana. So Jeff was the CPO of Atlassian, and just massive experience understanding the dynamics of all of those conversations, right? But he kind of said in one of our first conversations that you guys might have the first product where the chief people officer and the CFO get along, right? Because ultimately we're pushing the metrics up for both of them, right? For the CFO, priority number one is cost reduction, even more so now in the macro climate we find ourselves in, but just generally it's typically spend management, right? With Roamr, there's a guarantee that they're pushing 30% to the bottom line because we price based on how they currently price hotels. So that's very literal, but actually they get to deliver this back as a sort of goodwill thing to the workforce, right? Often it sort of, it can be a bit of a villain persona sometimes where, it is cost reduction and red pen and you can't spend this. But this is a way that they've actually had an opportunity to say, hey, we know that we're kind of tightening the belt in certain areas, but here's a way that we're actually creating financial opportunity for you, and it pushes the boat. The CPO then is kind of maybe a little bit more around what do we care about, getting people together to get their best work done, making sure the collaboration is intentional, making sure we try to retain employees because they're engaged in the workforce, and that kind of turbocharges all of that as well too. So what we've probably started with ourselves is the conversation has been a little bit more around the HR and the people leaders. Maybe that was where we first started with the product as well. Roamr for Workations was a perk or benefit.
Right,
and, that was maybe more value prop sold to the chief people officers. But thankfully, both of them are probably involved in the decision-making committee. So it gives us an opportunity to at least try and find a couple of extra conversations if we're not getting through to one or the other.
Now, you've talked about some Irish companies, but you're in many countries already now, right?
Yeah, so we landed a couple of partnerships quite early on that's been massive for us. And even just the validation of being associated with some of those key players in the future of work. So I'm talking about Deal, Remote.com, Oyster, Remo First. So those kind of employer of record platforms.
Right.
Again, it kind of goes back to that piece of work from anywhere is kind of what they've solved and created. It's now totally accepted and normal. But we feel that there's a lot more that we can still do in that space of creating better distributed work and more high-performing teams in that environment. So that felt like a really natural place for us to start.
Sure.
They've been quite embracing of it. So it's given us a user base now, in 100 countries plus.
Wow.
I'm not sure when the last checkup is.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to go down through the list and see where folks are. But there's companies that are across the pond as well that are embracing it as well too. But it kind of just shows the global applicability of what we're building, I think. So it's a nice internal metric.
There are so many companies actually, not at necessarily at the highest, largest enterprise level, but so many growing, scaling companies that are focused on providing opportunities, whether it's working from anywhere, remote working, just options, or full-time remote, and those workations, allowing people to have different experiences wherever they may be wanting to work in different countries that allows the different setups, employer of record, all those type of things. What are you seeing from this, very much in the crux of how you see that evolving? What countries are still really accepting, evolving that, and taking on board all these different types of remote and working from home, working from a third place type of options, and how they're adopting and integrating them into the longer term plans.
One of the things that I think about in this space, and it's probably a bit of an economist's mindset from the background, but there's a theory called the lemons theory. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's typically used to explain how markets function. And the example that I remember from when I studied it was in the used car market, right?
Okay.
So if you're a buyer in the used car market, most people aren't a mechanic, right? So they don't understand the difference between what they call a peach and a lemon. So a good car and a pretty crappy car under the hood. So let's say if someone's buying a car and a peach is €10,000 worth and a lemon is €5,000 worth, what most buyers will do is they'll midpoint it to factor in the risk of them not knowing whether this is a good or a bad car. Right?
Yep.
So the price that they're willing to pay becomes somewhere like $7,500.
Right.
But the reality is, if you are in that market and you have a peach, you're not going to sell it for less than what it's worth.
Sure.
Right? You're not going to sell it 7.5.
Right.
So what happens is all the peaches leave the market and the market gets flooded with lemons. So I took that mindset into the workforce, and it's like, your best people know their worth, right? They know that if you're not going to give them the flexibility and autonomy and the things that they want, somebody else will, and they'll back themselves to go and get it.
Right.
So if you don't embrace this as a people leader or as a C-suite, you are guaranteeing yourself, I would believe, the likelihood of you losing your best people, because they will go and get that. So I think that is the challenge. It's like, how do we find a way to give some flexibility, but also bring teams together and make it work? I don't know, hybrid is somewhere in the middle ground of that, but I think you take away some of the best parts. That's why we saw the work from anywhere policy rise so much, right? If you force somebody to live within commutable distance 3 days a week, you've taken away the location autonomy. So that's why I think the 30-day work from anywhere policies just were rolled out so fast, They're trying to find this middle ground.
For me, I really look at each person is different. Some people want to work remotely all the time. Some people want to work in the office all the time. It depends on the situation, what, how much space they have at home, what their, circumstances are. The majority of people want to have some time in the office and some time not. Sometimes that is possible. Sometimes that, isn't easy. Everybody's individual, and allowing them to have that. That said, having those experiences and enabling people to be working from anywhere part of the time for 30 plus days, depending on what the opportunities are, and then enabling experiences for business travel, just as Roamr is doing. I mean, for me, these are very exciting because it's really changing how we think about work, period. It's really saying, okay, now that we have more opportunities, we have different ways to be thinking about it. We've lifted up the hood to see what the components are, and then just sort of say, well, how can we organize them differently? And for me, that's really one of the things that you've done and said, how can we look at this differently? In fact, it's so interesting to me that it really came from the corporation, sort of saying, hang on a second, can we do this differently? And so, being driven from that to change their own employees' experiences and help them connect in different ways, not just at the office right before a meeting, but also in the evening without having to go out for drinks, but just sort of be sitting in each other's homes and in breaking bread together. This is really cool, and a cool development in terms of how we're working differently.
It acknowledges that flexibility, and it's a choice. If you are somebody who wants to travel into town, go to the hotel, you'll have that option. But if you're someone who's caring and fostering, trying to intentionally foster those relationships and build connection in the workplace, here's an option that maybe does that for you. I also think of it of, I look at Dr. Raj Chowdhury's work that he did on the Zapier offsite, right, where they realized after looking at the communication patterns on Slack beforehand, they did their big expensive offsite. Did that have an uplift on culture and collaboration, and was it worth it? And the thing that stuck out to me from that study was they found that people who were demographically similar when they came together at that big meetup hung out, but there was this cohort of cross-function, cross-gender, race, religion, just cross-demographic group that were communicating after that weren't communicating before. Why is that the case? And it turned out that they shared a taxi ride by pure coincidence.
I'm about to be interviewing him too, so I'm excited.
Oh, amazing. Ask him about that. Okay, cool.
Definitely.
But it got the thinking going. It's that's the engineered serendipity. How do you create more taxi rides where that culture can organically grow? We built the whole Roamr map as a part of that. So in the product, you can see where people are. Everybody has their avatar. It's randomized within 2K of the location type of thing, so you don't know exactly. But if you're in town, you can kind of see, all right, who else is in the city on this date? You can throw it forward and backwards. We kind of create connections based on shared interest and hobbies. So I like to run. If there anyone else on the team who'd like to do a park run or a coffee before work, and you can kind of create some of those taxi rides in a way, and it's a little bit more peer-to-peer. And that's on top of the sort of Roamr interaction that could happen in the first place.
Nice. So now you're engineering serendipity. What else do you have planned? Is it already launched, this Roamr Friends that I had mentioned?
Yeah, we're super excited about this. So we did a big product launch last month on it on Product Hunt, and ended up winning FinTech Product of the Week. So
you did?
Absolutely
Nice.
Brilliant. long day, but galvanize the team. And it's kind of like, you believe it yourself internally, right? And then you go and do a product hunt launch, and the world validates, okay, at least we're not completely crazy to be doing this. There is some interest here.
Right.
But what Roamr Friends does is two things. If you are already a customer on the platform, the employees can now stay within their personal network as well as with other employees. So it broadens the option pool.
Okay.
So the same split happens. They're creating financial opportunity for their friend, their college buddy, whoever that they were probably going to try and visit when they were in town. The company is still saving 30% and everybody's winning in that regard. But what Roamr Friends also has allowed us to do is, if your company isn't on the platform,
okay,
and you've heard about Roamr, you're doing a trip, you actually know somebody living in that city, you could just invite them to host you and spend and pay with kind of the company card or your personal card and claim it back. The company still saves money. You and your friend are earning as a result of this. So it's the same model reapplied, but it just opens the parameters to say that there's some folks that could now use it. And, maybe that might help us in time to help convince their org, being like, actually, look, your people already love this. Do we just maybe, megaphone it internally and you'll be able to drive even more savings? But it's a kind of validating option for us as well, too.
Love that. And the serendipity that you're creating locally, are you putting on some events now also to help sort of stimulate even more of that? Because what we're talking about here is insourcing and outsourcing some of these connections, which can help mitigate some of the isolation that seems to so often go hand in hand with people talking about remote working. And I think that it is very beneficial for managers to be encouraging people wherever they are, at home or when they're traveling, to be connecting with people in the local community. So that goes very much to what you're talking about, both connecting on a person-to-person level, but also, generating that the sort of consciousness about what that local community means to me, not just when I'm home, but when I'm elsewhere.
So like the way that we have it built is events are part of the platform.
Okay.
They can be created by peers, like they can be created by individuals in the network, or they can be created by, heads of employee engagement. And one way that we think about it is you can throw the map forward in time. So ultimately, if people are booking through Roamr, and it pops up, now they can turn it on and off if they don't want that always, right? But in theory, it's like, we know that people are going to be in town. Oh, look, we see that there's a conference going on in London and there's going to be 10 of our team. Why don't we just put on like a pizza and bowling or, do some sort of grassroots event? It won't be too expensive, but it just gets everybody together in person when there's gold that's not been harvested in that regard. I remember talking to an employee who works for, I won't put the name of the company on blast. They work for a big tech company and they're kind of have a fully remote mindset. And they were living in the same housing estate as one of their team members. And they didn't realize that they were within a couple of 100 meters for 6 months.
No, oh my goodness.
I just thought absolutely unacceptable. You could have been going for coffees. You could have had friends at work. You could get more work done in person. You could go to the third space and just build culture and collaboration. So that kind of also was part of the reason of why we're doing it, bring visibility to where people are so that they can meet up and find time in person. But we haven't started running like Roamr created events just yet. At some point we will start to do that. But for now, people can do it peer-to-peer. They can find someone you can see on the map who's got even shared interests and hobbies with you. There's a blue ring around that person. I like to cycle, you like to cycle. Let's jump on a bike ride while I'm in town. What we have started to see is the companies that are creating their events can now know, right, if you have 20 people attending and hey, 7 of these people have a hobby where they like bike riding, why not do instead of the walk on the beach that we were going to do in the morning before the event, why not just rent a couple of bikes and people are kind of creating those bonds based on their own shared experiences and interests. Exactly,
and more of that common ground. It's been so curious to me how many people within the same organization, when they have a meeting, don't even check the time zones that other people are in. Stephen, what haven't I asked you that I should have done?
One of the things that feels topical to us at the moment internally, that maybe fits into this future world, it's maybe a slightly, I wouldn't call it controversial perspective, but it's opposite to how most people are thinking right now, right? We're in this AI world of digital transformation and, we're trying to figure out what that looks like. How do we bring it into orgs in the right way, ramp up our productivity?
Sure.
But what we believe is we're now in a world where outbound emails and cold outreach is completely accessible across the world, right? Yeah. Because of AI, you can write en masse and send en masse from multiple domains.
Sure.
We actually believe that that's a race to the bottom in terms of making sales, right? so many people have been blasted with emails, you end up getting put in the same basket as everyone else and you don't get read.
Yeah.
So what we believe is with the adoption of AI continuing to increase, we're actually going to have to spend more time trying to build relationships and sales in person. So that's, I think, why the travel budget, and I know you mentioned at the top, like, there's been a huge resurgence in business travel, and a huge chunk of that is on team building. We're actually starting to see the sales piece creep up in that regard. I was doing a talk with Stripe yesterday.
Right.
Some other folks who are business owners, much bigger companies than us, validated that same thing. It's not what we're spending our money on. We're trying to actually get out there, build relationships, and it's almost a go back to our roots thinking on that, because everybody can send a million emails now. How are we going to stand out? How are we going to build those relationships? So that's one thinking for us that's a little bit different, I think, than what we're seeing out there.
If a company is looking to scale, looking to save some costs, obviously thinking about, Roamr and of the potential use of Roamr to be connecting with people, how is that introduced into an organization? Yes, you don't have to break down the barrier because Airbnb is already here, but within an organization, that may be different, sort of in allowing my co-workers to come and stay. If somebody's interested in thinking about business travel in a different way, how do they approach that?
Yeah, I think a lot of, even before we were doing what we were doing, a lot of the mindset has shifted in that space anyway, right? In 2017, 93% of corporate trips were booked in a hotel. 2 years later, that number was down to 67%. So it had declined by 25%.
Wow.
So we're looking pre-COVID, obviously, because it's hard to take any real data of trends in a couple of years. But the short-term rental market and the sort of sharing economy model has started to be adopted a little bit more. But it's challenging for companies to really get behind it, because there's actually no real reason for you to make a really concerted effort to go to your workforce and say, hey, folks, instead of hotels, we kind of want you to book Airbnb now. Yeah. Because there's no real savings anymore, right? Those two things, the price is pretty close to par nowadays. Right. So the reason someone chooses a hotel or an Airbnb or equivalent, it's kind of just personal preference. But they are always operating in their own self-interest. They will say, how much am I able to get out of this? What's the nicest hotel I can get, or the nicest Airbnb? If they choose hotel, they maybe want a restaurant on site and a turn-down service and a little feel of maybe luxury. If they choose an Airbnb, maybe they want more space, a kitchen to cook food in, or maybe the team is meeting up, right?
It's a different evaluation. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. So if you're the corporate travel manager or the people manager, there's not really much incentive for you to say, let's make this our priority number one. It's not really saving us money. Whereas for Roamr, it's now compelling because every single trip is 30% cheaper, but you're getting to also get the uplift potentially on culture and engagement and create those opportunities at the same time. So now it feels like there's a reason to do it. But without plugging ourselves, what I would say is the other thing to look at is travel bloat. Okay. So travel bloat to me is this underspoken, I think there may not even be a word for it, but we think about it as travel bloat. There's so much opportunity that goes a begging to save money on your travel. That because we're in a B2B space rather than booking as consumers, we're not achieving that. I'll give you an example. Someone who stayed on Roamr last week in London, I met them the Thursday before. They were going to London for a company dinner, but they hadn't even booked their accommodation. Now they were going in like 4 or 5 days. Right. If that was their personal trip coming out of their own bank account, that trip was booked 2 months in advance.
Exactly, yes.
So there's a kind of cost unconsciousness. For sure. The other side of things as well is you have platforms that do approvals. If I'm needed out in New York, for example, for a conference, okay, I send an approval for my trip to my boss and manager. Yep. What these platforms typically do is like they package in an estimate on flights and hotels, and then they add a buffer on top in case your manager takes 2 days to come back to you to approve it and the prices have moved. So what actually happens is the budget gets approved at a higher rate than now's strike
Interesting, price. Yes.
So the employees go, great, I have a little bit more money. And actually so I kind of see that as an opportunity for companies to think about saving money on travel. Travel bloat is kind of what we're talking about it internally. There's a bunch of opportunity. You could incentivize people to do the right thing if it's win-win for everyone, right? Obviously, the Roamr model is save 30% because you stay with a friend or colleague. But you could also do the same thing of like, hey, if you book 30 days in advance or if you book 60 days in advance, there's some kickback because you've saved us money. And there's space to figure things out by incentivizing and making it a win-win for everyone involved. So that's probably one piece of it. The other thing to answer your question on, not everybody will want this. It's up to themselves, right? Roamr's a choice. Yeah. If they want to stay in the hotel, they can. This is something that we add into the offering to give them an opportunity if they want to go after that kind of experience and a little bit of an extra money income stream as well.
Now there are different solutions, Roamr and others, that it can be done differently and people can be incentivized differently, and that can really change the game for small and large companies in terms of giving people access, not just to some cost savings, but also to new opportunities to connect with each other. Love hearing all about this, Stephen. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and everything all the different journeys and experiences that you're enabling for people and for companies. Thanks so much.
I really appreciate it. Well, thanks so much for having me on. It was great to chat.
Thanks so much again to Stephen Dooley, founder of Roamr. You can find out more about Roamr on LinkedIn, as well as visit Roamr's website, roamr.com. Immediate action tip. What can you do to think differently about business travel processes to reduce or avoid bloated costs? If you are finding the new business and work environment hard to navigate, contact me for board advice, executive mentorship, courses, and workshops that enable multi-generational distributed leaders, managers, and teams to up-level and scale rapidly in the modern work environment and be ready for whatever lies ahead. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it and share it with a friend. You can also write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated, useful articles, research and information, you can follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for watching. Until next time.